So now coming back for the 30th pick now, we heard him earlier. He took Paris Johnson out of Ohio State. Zach, let's hear number 30 from you.
Sure. With the 30th pick, the Eagles are going to draft defensive tackle Maisie Smith out of Michigan. Kind of picking up from where we talked about earlier, and I got to be honest, picking at this pick is not that fun because there's a lot of players that went before him that I really wanted to pick in this spot. That's also why I think the Eagles probably aren't going to pick at this spot, whether it's a trade up or down. It makes too much sense, and also they don't have a lot of mid-round picks. So, but anyway, back to the actual selection itself. This one is hard because it depends what kind of defensive tackle they want, I guess. Do they want a bigger guy who can like stuff the run, or do they want like a pass rusher? And I think you could go either way because I think the run defense last year, especially up the middle, was soft. And I think they realized that as a team. So I wouldn't be surprised if they go someone a little bit bigger on the inside, especially with the pass rushers they have. But I could also see them doing the exact opposite, getting someone next to Jordan Davis, who's a good pass rusher, who can bring the heat that way. Maisie Smith is one option. I thought about the one guy out of Clemson, I think.
Ryan Breesy.
Yeah, that was another option too. But yeah, and also I think it'd be funny to draft someone from OSU and Michigan in the first round together. So why not?
So I have, like, you've touched on what I really want to ask here. Smith is an interesting pick. He's a 337-pound nose tackle who can kind of move around on the interior, but ultimately that pick gives you two nose tackles that are 340 pounds plus in Jordan Davis and Maisie Smith, or Maisie Smith, however you pronounce it, who I think, would share snaps more than play next to each other. And I guess my question for you is, and you brought it up, right, because you thought about Brian Breesy, but why the nose tackle versus somebody like Brian Breesy who's a better pass rusher, who not only is a higher prospect, but somebody who's also 300 pounds, but has the capability to move outside the tackles and rush the passer, and plays the interior well, kind of a more versatile player and a more utility D lineman, which in my experience in the whole 2 seasons I've paid attention to the Eagles, no offense, is kind of like the Howie Roseman mentality, which is we take a lot of D linemen to get a rotation going, or utility D linemen. We do a lot of things because those trench players are what builds these Eagles teams that not only won a Super Bowl but made a Super Bowl. Like, this is the Howie Roseman mentality, is the trenches, right? So I guess ultimately why the second nose tackle over a utility D lineman who might be better who might be a better replacement for somebody like Hargrave than Maisie Smith?
That is a excellent question. And that's a super valid point too, because I think in the years past, the Eagles would have done exactly what you did. Draft the guy who can just penetrate, go up the middle, and just sack the quarterback, just flat out. But I think the Jordan Davis pick number 1 last year kind of signified something a little bit different. I think their defenses, and especially now because they don't have Gannon anymore and they hired Desai, and it seems like he likes to do the multiple fronts, not just one look. And they've been kind of shifting that way personnel-wise too, especially on not just D-line, but also other positions. So I'm curious to see if they actually do draft more bigger run-stopping defensive tackles, because they also have guys who can play multiple positions. Like Brandon Graham kicks inside on third downs to play D-tackle and rush from that way. So they have guys who can also play like multiple spots, even not necessarily a defensive tackle in that spot. But it's a super valid argument because, frankly, they could absolutely go a totally different direction. They might not even go defensive tackle at this spot. I could see them trading up to try to grab a corner. Same reason as offensive tackle, but no, it's a good point.
Let's say we're the luckiest podcast in the world, and this is exactly how the draft goes. You still have a couple corners that aren't taken.
Emmanuel Forbes is the one that jumps out.
Right, like you still have a couple corners that would be phenomenal picks here. I think to your point, I don't think the Eagles are standing still at these picks. I think they do move up and down, but obviously on this podcast for all you listening, we can't do 30 trades of what people really want to do and whatnot. But I do think you're right. I think maybe they stick at 10, and if their guy is available, but if he's not, they're definitely trading down, maybe collecting another first rounder next year or something like that. But I don't hate the pick of Mozzie Smith. I think it's a good pick because to your point, you do have a lot of utility D linemen, and while you lose Hargrave this year, you don't necessarily need that production in the pass rush in the interior. It was a luxury, but you don't necessarily need it. What you do need to do is stop the run, especially with a guy like Jordan Davis on the other side who ultimately he's only going to play probably 50% of snaps every game. So you definitely need somebody who's going to plug some holes.
So my only follow-up, and we'll let you go, Zach, is just going on what we mentioned before, the Howie Roseman stuff. This, again, I like the fact that you're going with what he does, and you can get a guy like DJ Turner or someone like that in a corner in the second or third round. So I don't have anything else, Steven. I don't know if you do, but you're the man, Zach. Oh, you do have one more. I thought you said you didn't. Go ahead, Steven.
No, I wanted one more that kind of came up. I know you said you got the 30th pick, but from round 3 to round 7, there's 125 picks right there that you guys don't have one. With you expecting to move back, I know you've already harped on you moving forward. If you move back, what did you want to see? What kind of compensation would you want to see in return? Because like Wally said, you can get some of these guys in later. There's some gems in that 4th, 5th, 6th round. Those are where some of those people come out of. What do you want to see there?
Yeah, honestly, if they could trade back, maybe I don't think it would matter too much how far they traded back. I guess maybe staying within the second round, maybe picking up a 4th or 5th, something like that.
Well, can I interrupt you for a second? Would you rather see them trade down for a first or a second next year, or would you rather see them trade down maybe 10, even 30 is probably a good spot to collect this at, but would you rather see them trade down to collect maybe a 3rd, 4th, 5th in this draft, or even a 3rd and 4th and maybe a 7th next year? Like there's a lot of compensation there. Would you rather see them collect more picks this year, or because they're such a solidly built team, and Howie, I questioned him earlier this offseason, but he's said, "Fuck you, David," straight to my face. Would you rather see him collect picks this year, or maybe bolster some first-round talent next year when you're going to lose maybe even more talent like your Fletcher Coxes, like other players like that, or Lane Johnson even if maybe the Paris Johnson pick doesn't work out? I don't know. But would you rather see him collect a high pick next year or 2 high picks next year, or trade down and collect maybe 3 picks this year or 2 picks this year and 1 pick next year?
So that's a good question because I'm going to stick with keep picks for this year because next year I think they're scheduled to have a ridiculous amount of picks, over I think at least 10, and that's the Saints trade that they still have a second round pick from, and they also are going to get compensatory picks from Javon Hargrave and all the free agents they lost, which they're scheduled to get a few. So I think they have a lot of ammo going into next year. I would rather refill the defense this year at least a little bit because there's still a lot of positions on the defense that are kind of question marks. Like they need a safety. They didn't get a safety. They probably need a backup to Slay and Bradbury because if one of them gets hurt, that's not going to be good. Linebacker is always a pressing need. They won't draft one high, but it's always a need. So yeah, I think grab just whatever picks they can get this year in the mid round just to fill the roster, fill the defense.
And I'm sorry, I'm pressing you because I really love the Eagles' position this year in the draft. Like there's a lot of things they can do, right? There's a lot of roster building moves. So I love to ask you because I love to get your opinion, right? But let's say, they just signed Jalen Hurts. They just signed him to a huge contract. Now, his salary cap doesn't hit as hard as you think it would. So then following up on what you just said, right? Next year, you have a boatload of capital. this year, let's say you trade down from 10 and you end up getting Brian Branch at, you trade down somewhere, you end up getting Brian Branch at safety, right? You're in a position where you might have traded down, but you've gained picks either this year or next year. And ultimately, you got to think for the future where there are probably, and this is how I think for the Browns, but there are probably 3 to 5 players on the roster that you keep long term. You know you're going to pay a significant amount of money, right? Knowing you've got a lot of capital next year, knowing that you could get some more capital this year, who are your 3, maybe 5 players that you're absolutely keeping? And let's say you trade down, who, like, do you still, knowing that those are your 3 to 5 players you're keeping, do you hold on the stance that this year you want to collect the picks, or do you go into next year knowing that maybe you've got your left tackle who's probably signed for another 2 or 3 years, who, yes, you're keeping, but you don't have to worry about that for that contract for another 2 years? Or, and I'm losing myself here because I'm so excited, because I there's a lot here, right? Like, there's a lot here, and I'm thinking in 4 different directions, so I apologize to everyone listening.
Well, I was going to say, let's let Zach get the final word, because we're going a little long.
I know, I'm sorry. I'm like, the Eagles excite me, so obviously, who are your 3 to 5 players? Does it, knowing you list that out, does it affect really who you want to select this year versus next? Or how many picks you want to get this year versus next?
Real quick question: 3 to 5 players, like just in total on a team, or just
who are you keeping long term? Because in the Browns, it's Myles Garrett, it's the 2 fucking guards. I'd love to keep Nick Chubb long term, but I'm not gonna think about that, right? It's Denzel Ward, Nick Chubb's not staying long term, and it's Deshaun Watson, right? So those are my players who I think are the core building pieces of the team. Who are yours?
Yeah, I gotta say, first, Jordan Mailata is one because of his age, and he's still an ascending player in my opinion. Like, he really just started playing football like 4 years ago. Like, he could conceivably get better. Landon Dickerson is another one. Like, he's been healthy, he's been excellent since he's joined the team, so he's got to be one. We assume Hurts is already like building block. He's already one of the building blocks. Goddard, I think, absolutely is. Depending on the time period, A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith are. And I've already just named the offensive building blocks. That's also why I think, in general, how I view this draft is I think the Eagles would rather double down on offense and also make sure they support Hurts no matter what. I think they learned their lesson, or how he learned his lesson from Wentz, and just the roster team buildup, and also all of the injuries that happen and just everything. I think he's learned a couple lessons from that, and now he understands offense is king. So you got your quarterback now. Whatever you have to do, just protect him, support him, do whatever you want. And if the defense takes a couple hits in the interim, that's what happens, and then they can try to rebuild next year. But I think the priority is offense.
Zach, thank you so much for coming on. Fly, Eagles, fly. Good luck trying to repeat next year.
It's my time now, Wally. It's my time now.
It is David's time on, which means we're going to say hello to Zach, and we're going to get the final pick of the first round. But thank you so much, Zach, for coming on.
Thank you, guys. It's always a pleasure.